Hi there, and thank you for taking the time to actually look at this brief video. Essentially, what I want to mention firstly is briefly introduce myself. My name is Martin Conn, and whilst I do not work full-time in property, I actually have a considerable interest in it, as to a larger degree quite a large number of Australian people do generally. Now, what I have actually found is that whilst the older style of thinking was essentially save as much as you possibly can, and then find a home, put a deposit on it after you've typically saved around 20% to avoid all the various insurances that are put in place to protect the banks, not you, mind you. You then sort of pay your mortgage as quickly as you possibly can, and before you know it, 25 to 30 years later, you're in a position where you own your own home. However, there is a lot more to it than just that. As I'm sure you're only too well aware, we have very busy lives as a rule. We often find that many people are moving from one position of work to another, and it's constantly changing. It's not a case of sometimes people always living in the same place for their entire lives like they may have in the past. So you really want to look at different ways in which you can improve your position in terms of property ownership and improve your position in terms of wealth generation. And certainly, whilst there's no one right and every other way is wrong, it is important to recognise there are different ways of approaching this, and I'm simply going to very briefly relate what has typically worked for me. I actually found that by starting where I bought just a vacant block of land, and at the time there were no conditions whatsoever on the purchase of that land, so I could have purchased it and held it for years and years and years, and obviously as long as I paid the rates, everything would be sweet. Now, in my case, I'd actually paid the land, paid the rates, of course, and after a few years had paid off that particular block of land, and then subsequently chose to use that as the deposit when I went again to apply for a loan to purchase, or I should say build a house on that. Now that actually worked very well for me, and that house I then lived in for some years, and it's now a rental property. Now, I've moved around different parts of Australia and even lived in other countries, and in a situation like that, I've always looked at ways to increase one's wealth again and again. Now, other ways to go about it is something called land banking. Now, this is to some people a very unusual idea. For some it's a little bit risky, for others it's absolutely normal and part of the course. And land banking is where you actually join a syndicate of investors or developers who essentially need the commitment of numbers of people, so that when they know that you have purchased an option which will have a certain price attached to it, and by purchasing an option you are simply saying, okay, this is something I would like to do, I don't have to act on it, but if I do, I can purchase land at a particular price that will be determined at today's wholesale price, and that land will then become available once development of the area has proceeded to the point where the shire or city in concern will actually allow people to physically start building. Because what actually happens from the point of view of starting a new town or city, it can be a period of 10 or 11 years from that point of decision to actually getting all the necessary approvals all the way through. And a number of very wealthy people are working on the basis of land banking, where they purchase options on various bits of land. They, in this situation, do not yet own the land, but they've got an option or right over having it. As a result of this, they're actually finding that they don't have to pay land taxes, they don't have to pay rates, yet they've locked in a price at today's prices for when the land becomes available at some point in the future. Now, it's not for everybody, but certainly if you want to find a way to actually start investing in land for the longer term, property has typically been the way to go. The returns on property vary typically around 11.5% per year on average, Now, naturally, there's going to be variations to that depending on which city you're in, depending on the current market trends and so on. However, for simplicity's sake, typically you're going to be looking at a situation along those lines. And this is a situation that a lot of people may not be aware of, but for example, from self-managed super funds, people can access funds in that to then put down these options and purchase this land, which then of course is owned entirely by the super fund. You can of course do it as an individual as well, and it is obviously a longer term arrangement where you might then choose to put a house and land package on there, or you may decide, okay, at the point of settlement, instead of you actually purchasing it, you're going to sort of pay out what you have to pay, but that immediately gets turned over to a new buyer. So these are some possible techniques as far as developing your wealth. Another option, of course, is a lot of people choose to buy houses or units or flats or whatever the case may be in much further out cities rather than right in the very CBD or close to. Simple reason, whilst yes, the travelling time is a lot longer, you're actually getting far greater value for money. You're getting a much better result in terms of a longer term return for a smaller investment initially. I'm well aware that some people may not consider anything but very close into the CBD, and that's fine. There's no right or wrong answer. It's really what suits you and what options you have for your particular circumstances. Not everyone has got a large pot of cash right now to play with. However, if you enter into this process one step at a time, you'll find that it actually makes a very big difference. So there are a lot of different ways to approach this. Other options, of course, include, but are by no means limited to, either if you have a house on a fairly large block because it's from an older period of time, typically 20, 30, 40 years ago, you'll find the block is usually much larger than the sizes of typical sold blocks today. And you'll be in a position, if you chose to either knock the house down and rebuild either units or townhouses. So if the council allows higher density, you'll be able to effectively instantly capitalise on it that way. Lots of different options. It really comes down to what suits you. Naturally, if you're not yet in the fortunate position of having owned any property, you've naturally got to start somewhere. Obviously, it might involve extra saving, it might involve extra overtime, even a second or third job. Whatever it takes, if you want it badly enough, you absolutely and definitively can achieve it. This is a concept of personal development as much as saving. A lot of this information is fairly readily available on the internet. One website, hostingsuccess.com/ICAN. There's no limit to what you can achieve if you choose and set your mind to it. Hopefully this short video has helped you to at least get some ideas that you may not have thought about before, and looking forward to hearing your feedback. Thanks, have a great day.